Senator from Kentucky.
Ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the following interns in my office be granted privileges until December 16th, 2022. Austin Gatesman, E.J. Monahan, Heather Mayonis, Jonathan McCartney, Nika Gogeshvili Matthews, and Spencer Woodall.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about a bill that would lift a mandate in the law dating back to the Great Depression. This mandate is that drugs have to be tested on animals before clinical trials in humans. This law was created back in the 30s, but I think makes no sense today, when the only methods we had back then were animal trials or human trials. But as the co-founder of a leading bioconvergence startup wrote in Forbes last December, this legislation was passed 20 years before the first modern blood test, 40 years before the modern computers, and 60 years before the human genome was mapped. Now we have all these tools and so many more to evaluate and ensure the safety of cosmetic and drug candidates before they reach human trials. Caught up to the science. The law perversely requires drug developers to test on animals, which often means killing them after the test is over, even when non-animal methods would work better. Passing this bill will put a stop to the needless suffering and death of millions of animals in labs across the country. An emeritus neurology professor at Mayo Clinic, David Wiebers, wrote earlier this month in the Kansas City Star that the differences in genetics and physiology among species can change the way a drug is metabolized in the body. As a result, the predictive value of using animals for toxicity testing is far from optimal. The intent of the 1938 requirement for animal models was to keep toxic drugs from harming patients, a noble quest. Yet statistics show that these animal tests are flawed and misclassify many toxic compounds as safe. This partly explains why over 50% of drugs found to be safe in animal testing end up failing in human clinical trials. But animal tests can be more than twice as expensive, sometimes up to 30 times more expensive as non-animal alternatives. This is despite the fact that it takes over a decade to bring a new drug to market and costs about $1 billion. You'd think that if you're making that kind of investment, you'd be getting something for your money, but not when the government gets in the way of progress. It's often said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We've mandated animal testing for the last 84 years, and it meant slower approval for promising drugs and cures. The time has come for the law to finally catch up with the science. I'm glad the Senate has acted, and I hope the House of Representatives will now move quickly to pass this measure into law. This law will allow the option of not doing animal testing. It's not that it will forbid and prevent any animal testing. It simply will allow the option of bringing drugs to market without sacrificing animals if we don't need to. Thank you, Madam President. And at this time, I would ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S5002, which is at the desk.
Is there objection? The clerk will report.
S5002, a bill to allow for alternatives to animal testing for purposes of drug and biological product applications.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.